All right. Amy has told me multiple times this morning, like it feels like a luxury that we have this amount of time for a Q&A. So thank you for your questions. And I mean, honestly, if we don't last the whole hour, that's not the end of the world. Then y'all can still mingle, and we have the room till noon. Well, past noon, but whatever. So I'm going to go ahead and get us rolling. If you did have a question that you didn't get to me yet, just feel free to walk up and hand it to me. Totally cool. And some of these, we're interacting here, but some of these are going to be more specific to one of you, but certainly fill in how you would like. But Todd, let's start with this question. When did you even realize what it was that was happening to you? Was it pre-wilderness, post-wilderness? How could you describe that?
Yeah, I was when my schizophrenia first presented, I was 25. This is in my first book. I was home alone. I was, in the dining room working on a piece of furniture, and I looked out in the driveway, and there's this girl standing out there talking, like a 11, 12-year-old girl, and So I went outside to see if she needed help or if her parents were around, and she was talking, but there was no sound. And I thought that was very strange. So I went back inside to get the phone to call the police or whoever, and I came back out and she was gone. Well, I thought at that point, well, maybe she's, lost, or she ran off to where she was supposed to be. But it lingered, like, why was she talking with no sound? And maybe a week later, I was watching TV with my wife and kids, and I walked back through that dining room, and it was at night. We were watching a movie. I was going to get snacks, and I'm getting chills because when I turned the corner to go through that room, she was standing in the dining room, and all the doors were locked, and that was when panic started, and I knew something was really wrong. So that's when I knew. And again, the stigma was so bad. I was so afraid of being locked in an institution forever that I didn't say anything for 15 years.
And sorry, you may have said this and I missed it. How old were you at that point?
25.
25. Okay. From the same submission here, taking a turn toward running.
Okay.
You mentioned running a race here in Florida, just out of curiosity and for fun. What was that race?
I ran the Long Haul 100. It's a 100-mile race out in Lakeland, right?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
I made 51.4 miles before my knees were pretty bad. I had it was my first 100, and I had kind of a training mishap where I trained on, mostly on pavement. And that race here in Florida is very soft, kind of sandy, almost surface. And so if you think of it, you need to train on whatever surface you are racing on, not just trails to pavement, but even soft dirt, even if it's flat like a sidewalk. If you have a tennis ball and you bounce it on this wooden floor, it's going to bounce back quite a bit. Well, your legs don't have to work as hard with that kind of rebound. Well, if all of a sudden you're bouncing that ball on soft dirt, it's not, and your legs have to work pretty hard. So, but I'm grateful to John because when I met John, he brought my wife and I, he met us at a Starbucks with a cooler and some chairs, which if you've ever run a marathon or longer, you know that a chair is, ultra athletes have a saying that says, beware the chair. But it was nice to be able to sit somewhere and have a cooler with cold drinks. But yeah, just train on the surface you're running on.
So along that line, do you find the endorphins from running are your best drug?
I'm going to be careful with that one. Medication is important. Right. But no, it is. I've actually worked with a couple doctors that have, not for my own treatment, but through my research and everything, that there's some more than the psychological aspect of outrunning mental illness. I think there's some research that's starting to show it helps your body absorb your medication better. You've got more blood flow, and like Amy touched on in her presentation, like spirituality, something like running fosters health everywhere. You eat better, you drink less so you can run better. So it just built like that for me. The endorphins, just being able, for me, I don't know if it was actually the running itself, but I was locked in so long in my apartment and just afraid to be in society at all, in public. To be able to go out and run on a mountain or in California next to just with that was the endorphin high for me, was to just be able to do that without anxiety.
All the non-runners in the room like, yeah, whatever. I just did 100-miler, whatever. Amy, for you, you mentioned the 5-minute speech sample. Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Sure. So the gold standard for measuring expressed emotion, that construct that I talked a lot about in my talk, was an hour-and-a-half lengthy interview, and so because it was such a helpful tool in figuring out how patients were likely to progress, we needed a more efficient way of measuring it, and so a group of researchers led by Anna Magana and colleagues developed something that was a 5-minute version. Literally, you ask, tell me about Todd and how if I'm your sibling or parent or whoever is in the treatment, and how the two of you get along, nothing else. And then it has a operationalized coding system. So the certain number of criticisms that come out or generalized hostility, and it's not quite as sensitive. The threshold isn't as good for detecting high EE, but it has good concordance, and it's 5 minutes as opposed to an hour-and-a-half. So it's a really helpful tool if you're doing research on a bunch of constructs, but you don't want to not measure EE.
Is that helpful? Where do you find it?
I can send it to you. Anna Magana is the author, and so you could find it there, and that is the prompt. So the coding manual is harder to access, and there are some copyright protections, but I can certainly send you the prompt. That's outlined everywhere, so to see what the instrument looks like.
So a different question from Stephanie regarding religion. What are your suggestions, and either one of you, but how would you suggest family members handle different religions, when you're dealing with that whether it's family or whoever?
You would think that, was it you that asked that question, that it was planted, because I love that question. When I was developing culturally informed therapy, I was really worried about that. Like, well, what if one is atheist and one member is Christian or one's Jewish? And so, we decided that, you people are going to set their own homework assignments. They're going to, you can be working from the non-religious handouts, and another person can be working from the religious ones. But we thought that might create a lot of tension, but it was actually amazing. More often than not, the family members loved learning more about the other person's faith and beliefs, and so it ended up being a way that they're getting to know each other better. It's not like they didn't already know they had a different faith, and so it was a way to get them to think about, I that's really interesting. I didn't know that. So it wasn't a struggle at all. Now they might set different exercises for themselves, and one exercise might even be to learn more, because that's the whole goal of the intervention, is to get them to see themselves as interconnected. So one goal could be to attend each other's services and learn more about it, and that's one of the activities to get them to, and it's, we often say we want them to have commonalities, but it's not the goal to be identical. It's what makes relationships interesting, when we have different knowledge sets, when we have different ideas about things. And so I was very worried, that's going to be a challenge, and it was actually as easy and often more beneficial than when you were working with the same faith.
I find that interesting for a whole bunch of reasons, but it seems to me that the reality that if we can just listen to one another, back to that active listening, one of you mentioned that, just listening to it, one another, no matter, even if it is a sensitive, so to speak, topic, religious or political, whatever it is, just having that respect for one another is going to help the conversation happen. Do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, I was going to add real quick. From my perspective, I've never really struggled with this, but I've had a lot of people that I've worked with and known through groups and things that struggle with schizophrenia or similar illnesses that, at least specific to schizophrenia, there has to be a little bit of a caveat there, because there are often godlike ideations, whether it's God talking to them or that they're Jesus or Buddha or something, and that is something that prevails a lot with schizophrenia. In general, spirituality for me has been, the mountain is my church, and that, there's a section in my book where I was having a near-death experience, and I won't spoil that for you, not because I want to sell books, but it's fun to read about it. But I think that there's the religion we hear about in church and from our parents and whatever it was, whatever it is, that's great for everyone. But I think there's something we miss if that's all we get, and we don't. I felt, and more throughout my life with all these experiences, that especially with mental illness, that there's something there that's not, it doesn't have a name or any kind of books or anything else. It's just between you and me and the trees and everything. It's just there.
One thing I think is important to add, and I usually in this talk I mention this, in our treatment, if somebody is we operationalize this by using an instrument, the brief psychiatric rating scale. But if they're what we call like floridly psychotic, if they're scoring a 6 or a 7, we send them out to get a medication consult. And if they're having religious delusions, but they're lower level and they're still able to engage in a cognitive behavioral program, we'll treat them, but we go automatically to the more secular handouts, because by definition, delusions are not rational, and so it's not helpful to be that if they're believing that they are Jesus Christ themselves, and the first thing you learn when you interact with people with psychosis, if somebody's having a delusion, it's real to them. You don't challenge them. You work around or you digress and move on. And so we didn't have that problem often because we required them to be stabilized on medication, and because we know when somebody's really psychotic, they can't engage in sort of the reality testing and things that's required of our intervention. They can certainly do other types of interventions and take their medications. And so we are not treating somebody who's having a religious delusion or experiences with a religious intervention. I think that's really important. I usually talk about that. I had to cut out some things to meet the 45-minute goal today, but
which is why we're talking now,
Yeah,
to fill the gaps.
Can I ask you a question? Have you had it where it goes the other way, where the person goes into the religious experience and then the delusion happens?
So when people, I think you alluded to this, and I love the comment about dreaming. When people dream, they distort reality. You said that in your talk today. And so when people become psychotic, their reality is based on what their real experiences are. And so they might be it's just like somebody who has they're a highly anxious person, and they have a critical family member, and then all of the sudden the extremes of that critical family members, they think that family member is trying to poison them when they are harmful, but that piece of it is a delusion. And so somebody is religious, they are more likely to have religious delusions because that is their day-to-day. We don't dream about things we've never experienced, and so it's sort of an exaggeration of one's reality, and that's what makes it a psychosis. And so yes, religious people are more likely to have religious delusions, and athletes are more likely to have delusions that are related to their sport.
So staying on this theme a little bit, just a different twist here. This question, in your studies, either one of you, did you encounter schizophrenia being viewed as demonic? in religious families?
I have not. No.
That was another thing, because some of the bloodiest wars are fought in the name of religion, that you would expect to see more of now. It was more of the Spanish-speaking families, and they were talking about it as this will help us get through that, and it does happen. I mean, I hear about, I do a lot of work in the LGBT community, and they talk about their families, viewing them as, and so it definitely, there is the potential to use religion in really awful ways. We didn't see a lot of that, and we used the religiosity segment of the intervention to work with maladaptive uses, like saying your illness is a punishment from God for misdeeds, or the other thing that does happen a little more than that is saying God, it's in God's hands. We don't need to do anything. I don't have to take my medication. God will cure me, because that is not productive. And so then we'll ask them about passages from the religion. God helps those that help themselves, and that's usually a way to kind of encourage them to find passages or make interpretations that help them lead a life that we know as mental health practitioners can really help, but it's a life that's important to them. Only they get to decide what a meaningful life is.
So going now into some questions about working with particular people and families. In young adults and late teens, what is an early distinguishing feature between schizophrenic and bipolar with psychotic features?
Mm-hmm. In any one point in time, those disorders are so hard to differentiate, because I mentioned this during my talk. If you have schizophrenia, even if you don't have schizoaffective disorder or bipolar disorder, it's hard. I mean, you heard Todd's story, and so it's more normal than not to have affective components. The definitional kinds of things is which one predominates. Like if you are only seeing mood symptoms in the midst of a psychotic episode, that's going to lead you more towards a schizoaffective disorder, and it also depends on the amount of times, or schizophrenia that is impacting a person's life and making them depressed and sad at times in ways that most of us would. If it is the mood symptoms that predominate, and occasionally, and this happens a lot when somebody is really in the midst of a very serious manic episode, they often are psychotic. They wouldn't necessarily get a diagnosis of schizoaffective disorder if it's the occasional. So those disorders are close cousins. So if you see, often you'll see family members where one member has bipolar and another has schizophrenia. So and if you kind of need a history, because it's difficult to distinguish between, is it schizophrenia and is it a mood disorder? And the main reason that it's important to distinguish is for medication. Our treatment would work just as well for bipolar or for schizophrenia, and we wouldn't even need to modify the education component that much, because they're so similar. It's just that the biochemistry is a little different, and so that's really where that distinction is important. And sorry, the question was about young kids.
Right, young adults and late teens.
So just to say, you will see more of the irritability, more of the depression, moodiness, sadness in those that are more in the affective disorder spectrum, and you'll see more of the, schizophrenia doesn't usually onset until age 18 or so for boys, and often after 20 for women, but you will see some of the negative characteristics. Kids are often, they don't socialize well, they don't make great eye contact, and so that's how they look a little bit different as before they have their first break, that we call it, when they're diagnosed.
I want to say something about environment with that. In my own experience, you all know that I did not reveal my illness. So, if you break your leg and you go to the ER and you tell them your neck hurts, you're not going to get the care you need. And I've worked with parents of teenagers a lot. And one thing I've noticed is that I think there's a big environmental difference between when I was a teenager struggling with mental illness or if I was bullied or something like that, like take bullying as an analogy here. If you're bullied, the only people that knew about it when I was a kid were the people next to your locker. Now, if you bully somebody on Facebook, millions of people see it. Now, if you bully somebody about their mental illness, are they ever going to reveal that ever again? So that's got to be hard for everyone to try and figure out what's actually happening if the environment is that volatile.
Can I ask Todd a follow-up? Do you feel like it's getting better? More of these conversations and...
A little bit. I mean, I think there's a big movement right now for youth, junior highs and high schools, middle schools, high schools, where there's a lot of education. Is it changing the dynamic of how those kids are talking to each other? I don't think so. Maybe a little bit, but I think in general, I think what social media has done is it's kind of removed compassion. Like all of a sudden everybody has a microphone and everybody can say whatever they want. But, in general, I think that a lot of times the kids I've worked with that have experienced bullying and all these negative aspects, they feel hopeless. They don't, and you said they're already kind of withdrawing to begin with, and this just even further pushes that down. So no, I don't think it. I mean, there is a movement as far as like through schools and through parents and groups like that, but I can't say that I've seen that it's really changing how the kids are feeling about what's going on with everything.
So a second question from this person, it goes to how does a family get referred to the CIT program? Is there a way for families in Sarasota to get referred to it?
We were running trials for about 10 years, and now we're talking about getting it into, for example, I was just talking about, I have a student placed at MGH in Boston, and getting it there and into communities. This is what I was saying to both of you earlier. We need to be getting it implemented. And so we run trials, and because you're in Florida and I'm licensed in Florida, I could see families over through Zoom. I'm licensed to do that, and out of state lines I'm not. But I am starting to try to get it out in communities. I know you're connected with counseling movement. That is something I'm hoping to have it in more of the clinics that are local, that are run by local people. And so at the moment, that would be challenging because we ran clinical trials for 10 years, and we're switching over, probably running interventions next for police officers. And so at the moment, that would be challenging. But reach out to me, because we're working on that.
Which we haven't shared email addresses and that kind of stuff. Maybe before we finish, we should do that. That would be helpful. Since you just mentioned police officers, I'm curious, and this is for both of you, based on your experience and research, what gaps need addressing for those in the first responder field?
I've had several personal experiences with emergency situations where I was the person involved with police and fire. Generally, they were neutral at, for the most part. I never really had any other than, being shackled to go to the courtroom, but that wasn't really an emergency situation. Everything else was pretty good, actually. I have spoken with a few police departments and fire departments, and I have encountered kind of almost a barrier there, where it just doesn't seem like there's interest or funding or anything else, and that's unfortunate, because Amy and I were talking before this. I have worked with a lot of individuals that have encountered unfortunate situations or situations that could have been handled better by emergency services. Again, that's a very difficult job. Let's take the example of somebody, I mentioned the example of me being attacked by little fire creatures when I was on my way to get my meds. Well, to everybody responding to that situation, I'm nonverbal. I'm rolling around on the ground screaming. I'm either, on some sort of drug or I'm having a mental. How do you figure that out as that responder? And I think, one of the things that we're just really starting to talk about this aspect of it, but as opposed to, let's say, if I'm approaching that situation as an officer and I ask the individual, are you on any drugs? Well, that's almost immediately accusatory in a way, or assuming at least. What if that officer said, who's your doctor? Because if the person is having a drug crisis, the response is going to be much different than if you have a mental health person. They're going to, and there it's a win-win, because now if you do get the name of the doctor, now you can really connect and really get that person help right away. So I think a lot, and we're just in the beginning of this, but I think those kinds of things are really something that we can get into the hands of, and the officers just generally don't have the training at all. It's like in the slide I had about the response in a domestic violence situation. If one of those individuals has mental illness and the officers have been responding to this house over and over, they are not going to take the complaint or the what would it be, the report the same way. And they just don't have the training to respond to that. And I'm encountering not just I've had fundraisers. So, and I don't ask for a lot of money to go talk to police departments, but their budgets are so limited, they just don't have money for this.
How much time do I have? This is actually a topic that I'm really interested in. I'll try to say this concisely, but around 2020, there was so many high-profile deaths with people like Daniel Prude at the hands of police officers. A really tragic story. A relatively young black man who his brother called because he was suicidal and having a serious episode. He called the police for help, and they came and put a spit hood over his head, and he aspirated, and within the week he died. And there was also George Floyd, and so I spend, and I showed that statistic today, about 25% of the deaths are people with of fatalities at the hands of officers are people with serious mental illness. And I was thinking, we have to advocate here, and so I became really interested in what we could offer as mental health practitioners, and I went into it from the angle of I've spent my career trying to improve the lives of people with serious mental illness, and then I spent the last 2 years interviewing police officers and talking to police officers, and I alluded to some of this research, but they have the toughest jobs. They are underpaid, overworked, and so and because of the things that they see day in and day out, they are clinically depressed. I double the rates of lay people, and I mentioned this already in my talk, 5 times as likely to have post-traumatic stress disorder. And I won't reiterate all of the research that shows just dealing with that is going to make them less aggressive in their day-to-day. Now, I spent the last 2 years interviewing them one-on-one, asking what can we do to get officers actually to take those intervention programs. And I asked them specifically about interacting with people with mental illness as a sideline of questionings, and they do say, we don't have the training for that. It's getting better. These crisis intervention researchers are implementing training specifically about serious mental illness, and we are seeing fatalities decrease in the cities that have them. And so they are doing great work, but it's too slow. And so I think we need to intervene in both having at the level of the force to one, train officers about the things that Todd mentioned are helpful when you approach someone and you think they might have a mental illness. You don't use your command voice. You say, how are you? How are you doing? That doesn't mean they don't have to protect themselves. And if they must draw a gun, that should be the last resort. But learning how to interact with people with serious mental illness, but that is a different question than changing the police culture so that it is okay to seek help. They are taught that they cannot show any weakness, and they internalize that. If they acknowledge that they need help with their trauma, then they are at risk of losing their job. And so police officers told me it has to be not only completely confidential, because there is the worry that it'll filter back to the police chiefs and they'll lose their jobs. It has to be separate and off-site. It has to be that there's no documentation, so that these are logistical challenges through how insurance reimburses them. They have to be able to say, hey, I had a traumatic incident in the line of duty. I need, a week of mental health time, and they need to be compensated for that time. And so I think really I never went into this, with the idea that we need to work with police officers and tell them to stop killing people with serious mental illness, disproportionately Black men. That was where my heart was, but I always knew that they have a important and horrible, probably arguably the most stressful job there is. But through it, I realized, this is a population in need, and a population that is very unlikely to seek help on their own. And so I think finding out what are the barriers, and I have a lot of ideas now because I've been talking to police officers, what would make you more likely to be okay seeking help. And also one thing that is outside of the realm of psychology, I think you mentioned it, but they are so in the media, they are the enemy. And I have to say, it's any deaths at all are too many, but 99.9% of their interactions with people with serious mental illness end smoothly. So we do have to recognize that as well. So I'm feeling now I'm going to try to make my role as the advocate for both groups, because if police officers' mental health is better, there's going to be fewer deaths of everyone. That's just a fact.
What both of you have illustrated to me, and I think the group this morning, is advocacy is so important. Whether it's from the research training side, whether it's from the lived experience side, or whatever side. If you're a family member and your family's walking through any of this together, advocacy is so important. Which leads me to this question you've mentioned several times, the Black population. So here's a question. Could you speak more on schizophrenia within the Black population and whether there is a tie to epigenetics?
Mm-hmm. Most likely, yes. It's a complex disorder, and so things get passed down. So trauma gets passed down, and your brain chemistry changes when you experience discrimination, poverty, and all of those things. So some of that is probably passed down in that way. And then the environmental components. I said this in my talk, but I think it's really important to underscore the fact that the only places where Black people have higher rates of schizophrenia, in African countries, the prevalence rates are the same or lower. It is a function of the environment in which they have lived. Some of that could be an epigenetic pathway from poverty and experiences that change the brain and the genetic coding, if you will, of their parents, and then their parents' lack of resources and their own understanding of how to manage these illnesses as well. That has an environmental component. So it's absolutely both things. I think the research on the prevalence rates tells you a lot about the fact that the differences that we see are likely environmental and genetic, to the extent that the parents that pass on the genes were the victims of the same environmental and institutional barriers that Black people face in this country. So I don't know if that was a...
Well, let me do a little caveat there, because I know last year, for those of you who weren't familiar, we've done, we meaning Samaritan, has offered an event the last 2 years called Integrate, which was a whole day of this kind of stuff. And anytime we've done anything on epigenetics, the room was full.
Yeah.
And everybody's like, we can't get enough of it. So I'm curious, from your perspective, either one of you, is there still a lot of help that we feel like epigenetics, or, understanding it, leaning into it, is going to benefit us?
I think there is room to be done. We know it's genetic. It has a 80% heritability factor, but we still don't know which genes. And there could be some, we have amazing technologies. If we can isolate the genes, we might have a better way of figuring out how do we respond to that. That could even feed back into things we already use, medications that need tailoring and different kinds of targeting. And it could also help counsel people better who have the illness in their family. So I think that work will be amazing. Probably in my lifetime, the main improvements in management are going to come from better access to psychotherapy and better medications. They've gotten a lot better since even the 30 years I've been in this field, but that I think is probably going to have, in the short run, a much bigger impact on the day-to-day lives of people. But we need to do it all. So I do think there's some benefit from continuing to figure out,
So let me use what you just said and segue us into accessibility. Help us, Todd, from your perspective, get a feel from your experience. Where are we? How do we sit when it comes to accessibility?
I think COVID was good and bad. I'll start there. COVID isolated a lot of people, and it created a lot more mental health difficulties than we had before. But it also opened the door to telehealth. And like I said in my talk, that a big thing I struggled with is that not only did I have, so a lot of people who are have mental health struggles are on disability, and a lot of them live alone. Well, I didn't, because of my schizophrenia, my license was suspended, so I, wasn't driving either. I lived in Arkansas in a town, and there were 6 mental health facilities within a mile of my apartment, but none of them accepted Medicare. So I had to take an Uber 30 minutes north twice a month because Medicare doesn't let you have more than one appointment on one day. So 4 Uber rides on a limited income, plus having to walk into Walmart, which has more cameras than anywhere else. I guess I'm shaming them now, but there's cameras everywhere, and that's difficult for somebody with anxiety. Not just the cameras, but going to public. And I think, touching on what you said about self-medicating, if I have to spend $120 on Ubers to go see those places, and then I have to walk to Walmart past all those people and cameras and everything else to get my medication and then pay for my medication, and the liquor store is a block away, and then the system itself, I was on a program years ago where I was getting my medication for free, and I have to be careful about this because I'm not a doctor, so I can't name the names of the medication. But I was on that program getting it for free, and all of a sudden the company changed or eliminated the program, and I went from $0 to $1,000 a month, which was like twice my income at the time. And so I switched medications. It actually worked out better for me, at least for the medication side, but how often does that happen? Right. And why are these programs just changing all of a sudden? So I think accessibility is better as far as like appointments and going to see doctors and things like that, but I think there's a long way we could go towards making it just easier for people to access treatment and meds.
Yeah, I think some of that is even at the level of it's impossible to understand where you're covered, where you're not covered. Yeah. And if somebody is mentally ill, it's hard to navigate that system. I mean, I have a PhD and I sometimes don't know where I'm supposed to go for what thing. And so I think it's part of the accessibility is having the information that's out there that people can understand and then also I think COVID, we were doing the CITS intervention then, and we got shut down and we moved online. And I thought, oh, this is going to be terrible, and it was wonderful. People could get there. Our attrition rates dropped a little because they weren't fighting traffic, and so that actually, as Todd mentioned, was reduced one of the main barriers to access. So that turned out.
Yeah, you generated something for me too. I think that, at least from my perspective, the devices and things were good and bad. Obviously, I don't have trouble with that now with cameras. I actually have 2 cell phones now. I didn't even have a single cell phone until about 5 years ago, or 6 years ago, because I was afraid of being tracked. I think there is a barrier there. If somebody is the only way they can access where they can go or having an appointment is through a camera, that might be hard too. And like you said, the system is difficult to figure out if you don't. And people on disability may not have a fancy computer or a phone that they can just look at.
And I think loneliness and isolation is a huge component of this disorder. And so I don't think one replaces the other, but it's really nice to be able to be seen if you can't make it in. But there's also some benefits for periods of your life. I think, that might be the only interaction somebody has, and so that's it's helpful to be able to choose. Some people, as you said, are fearful of the cameras, and some people just want to sit across the room and look at the person that they're talking to, and that's therapeutic in and of itself. And so we need to have more choice, I think, and it needs to be how you decide what your resources are just needs to be made clearer to people.
Yeah. Got a couple of questions about getting into intervention and the guilt model, but before we go there, take a little breather here. Todd, you have more than once, either through your social media post or just our conversation, you've talked about the importance of joy. Tell us about that.
Yeah, we were talking about that this morning. Roosevelt said that comparison is the thief of joy, and I've encountered that a lot in running with people I train as well as, work with. And I've encountered that as an advocate for mental health, either people comparing that, well, I've never run that far, or I'm only running this far, or, well, your disorder is worse than mine, or it doesn't matter. It's all relative, and everybody's difficult is their own. Joy is something that I don't even wear my watch when I run anymore because it doesn't matter. I just go out until I'm done and then I come home. And, I found that thief of joy creeping in not just from comparison of myself with people that were doing things years ago in my life that I was, not able to do. And I told my wife, I told my friends, I just want to do, and this is a horrible word, but I just want to do what normal people, or what everybody else does. There's a lot of things, and I think there's a perspective there that, is not really understood, that a lot of folks take for granted going to a restaurant without anxiety or paranoia or, whatever it is. And that's a thief of something. And then that person who can't go is comparing themselves while they sit at home to everybody else who's off having a good time. And it's hard. I mean, a lot of times, to circle this back to running, a lot of people are like, well, why do you run so far? Why can't you just run 5 miles and, go have breakfast? But I think for me, in our society, a fancy coffee or a really nice leather seat on the airplane, or, I think we're substituting joy for things that we've forgotten, and I was talking about, this with Leslie earlier before I flew down here, was that, you know, there's an element of we grow the most when we're struggling the most. You know, nobody reaches new barriers of joy when they're just in a good frame of mind, you know, watching a baseball game. Go Cubs. But they, you know, I've learned more and I've grown more in my darkest, hardest moments than ever before. Is that a little bit like running a really long race? Yes, you have to keep going. But yeah, joy. It was missing for decades in my life.
So I want to ask Todd a question, because you have talked about that a lot and how much you've learned and grown from your illness. With that in mind, I'm taking this question from a TED Talk that I saw with Ellen Sachs, who is a person with schizophrenia who wrote several books and was the chair of the University of Southern California Law School for many years. And she was asked the question, if you could alternate, if you could go back in time and change things, would you rather not have schizophrenia? She quoted writings of another famous person saying, if you take away my demons, my angels may flee too. But she said for herself, because it was so challenging, she would. So I wanted to pose that question to you.
Yes and no. And yes, because of all the devastation it's caused people in my life and myself, because I've really hurt a lot of people really badly, my children, my wife, everybody. No, because I guess if we didn't have Helen Keller, would we have Braille? You know, and sign language, and if we didn't have Abraham Lincoln, who, if you know his story, grew up with an abusive father, had to sneak away and steal books from the library because his dad wanted him to just work in the fields, would we still have slavery? So would I be sitting here helping you understand what I've gone through? No, I wouldn't be. And so, you know, yes and no. It's caused a lot of devastation, but it's given a lot of education and understanding and hope and healing too.
So I want to end with both of you giving some insight into things you've referenced, and starting with you, Todd. You mentioned and gave several illustrations of people being involved in your model. Mm-hmm. Can you give us a little more insight into what exactly, and I know I'm giving you like 120 seconds here, but just some insight into what does it look like to participate in the model?
Basically, the participants I had in the model were people that I worked with, or children. Actually, two of them were children of people that I worked with. I used my experience with them as almost like you would if you had a hypothesis to, you know, put people through that program, that treatment, to see if it fit, you know, and I needed to change anything. Like I say in the model, this is not, you know, this is a first step of a dialogue that is most likely going to change. But if you are interested in that, should you get my email now? It's Todd Crush, which is my name, CRUSH2222@gmail.com. Reach out to me. You can also reach out to me on Facebook. That's a little tricky because if we're not friends, it goes to some random folder if you have a business page, but email is probably the best. And I am always looking for ways to help, from professionals to participants to whoever, to see how we can take the model from what I've put forth and change it and alter it with lived experience, clinical experience, all of it. I think, you know, not just the model, but all of this is a big step towards educating officers and doctors and everyone.
Beautiful. Todd Crush, 422222@gmail.com. Yeah. So Amy, I know you mentioned interventions, you know, and I'm, again, out of curiosity, is that like a one-time thing? Is that ongoing? Give us a little more insight into that.
So for about 10 years, we ran it consistently, and we ran forms of it that I think would be very productive to have in clinics where in multifamily groups, and they were ongoing to the degree that you could come for a year and go out and be functioning fine and then come back. Ideally, we need to have more of that in actual communities. So we're not running this intervention. It is out there. If you want the intervention, contact me, because there are now many therapists that are trained, that are practicing around the country, and so I can probably find you the person who can give you this intervention, and I can give you resources that we have for all of the families that come through the clinic for after. So I have good resource lists at easily accessible, and so please reach out, and I can give my email now. It's my first name, Amy, and then Weisman at miami.edu, and I have a few business cards if you want it with the email.
EI.
Right. Did I spell my own name wrong?
Well, you didn't spell it.
Oh, thank you. Yeah.
So we've had a full morning. It's very helpful. Thank the two of you for the work you do, the passion that you have for it, and the willingness to share it. Because as I told Amy when we were waiting for this portion, the opportunity that I hope we can continue to do, whether it's collectively through Samaritan or whatever, is to continue to bring conversation forward that maybe people haven't heard before, or that we know they need to hear, and let's give a platform to it. So thank you for being willing to do that and doing that for us today.
Thank you.
I wanna have everybody thank John and Samaritan, because John's been the driving force for all this for almost a year.
All right, well, that is our time today. And for those of you watching online in Miami, Arkansas, wherever you're watching from, thank you for joining us today. A reminder that if you are looking for CEUs, to send me an email so I can send you a link to an online form to do that. And that's john@samaritangulfcoast.com. Reminder, those in your room looking for those, make sure and leave your forms with us if you have yet to leave that. You can just leave it on the table out there, or hand it to one of us on the Samaritan staff back at our table as well. Nicole's back there if you want to leave it there. I do have a request, and it's not an obligation, it's just a request. I'd love to get a picture of everyone in the room up here by the stage. So before you leave, if we can do that, and Nicole, I'm going to put you on the spot. Nicole's going to be our photographer. I just think it'd be great to have a photo of everybody, and I'll ask you two to go down and be on the floor, and we'll just all surround you, and this will be our exit, our dismissal for today. So come on down.